Live from the Washington DC area, all empowered citizens need to know about intelligent use of resources, smart governance, inclusive communities, smart industry, and healthy, thriving urbanization. This is Smart Sustainability, the TV talk about shaping a sustainable future in the digital age with Nicolette. 2020 Future Forward. How do young people feel about what's to come? Our topic tonight. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. This past year has changed many lives and many outlooks on life too for every generation. The younger generations, though, are in a particular place. They are going into a completely new world that's just emerging, where there are no guidelines. Many things that were plannable milestones for their parents, that is to say Gen Y, X, and up, are no longer there. Even before 2020, there has been talk about new values. How can multi-generations work together? How digitization kind of eliminates the usual ranks and hierarchies. COVID has fast-forwarded all of this. We're in a world that's largely undefined yet. The old world is crumbling, but the new one is just shaping and is loaded with unknowns. Without clear paths in progressing career-wise, with a completely new understanding of work for everyone, a new way of defining responsibility, and certainly a much greater trust and level of freedom that younger generations must be given, not just through remote work. Younger generations want different things. There are plenty of studies by Gallup, McKinsey, and others that talk about that. So if you're a parent, you know what I mean. And if you're among the younger viewers, you also know what I'm talking about. But our younger generations also grapple with challenges that Gen Y and Gen X didn't have. So with a completely new world on our doorstep, how are they coping? How do they see their future? And if you're one of them, how do you want to live? Joining me tonight are three young people from different walks of life, different backgrounds, and different stages in life that feel pretty strongly about the future, each in their own space.
Hello, my name is Callaway Childress. I'm an AV/IT technician with George Washington University.
Hello, my name is Star Boyd from West Philadelphia and is currently living in Washington, DC, and I am a professional development specialist for ICMA.
And we have Nishat Knight, a voice actor who works as an assistant for a photographer in his day job. Welcome, all three of you, to Smart Sustainability. And I'm just checking to see if we got everyone here. Can you all hear me? But I cannot hear you. It seems.
Yep, we were.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, it works. So we got you all here. Thank you so much for joining us. It is really beautiful to see all three so smiling despite the, difficult times we're all in. So when we talk about the future forward, and at 2020, really, when you think about this, when you think about the past year, what comes to mind? I'm going to start with you, Callaway. How would you describe it? Just three words, like the first three that would come to your mind. What do you think about 2020?
Unexpected, ever-changing, unnerving in a lot of ways.
Unnerving in what ways?
There's a lot of things that are happening right now that we didn't really expect to be coming into. I mean, growing up, especially people my age, you saw the 2008 housing crisis, you saw events such as 9/11, and you saw the war in Iraq really get started and rolling. And those events kind of happened, but they were so large to us and so early in our lives that we thought we wouldn't have to have something like this happen. And coming into it to see COVID really cause the same disruption to the industry, to the economy, and to really the standard of living that we're going to be walking into. Mm-hmm. It really makes you think a lot about how you're going to build your life moving forward through this. And really the roadblocks that it's set in place based on just how much has changed.
Interesting. Star, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, to piggyback off your first question, if I had to choose three words to describe 2020, it would be disturbing, one, chaotic, and some way, somehow, possibly, maybe, I'm trying to get the right word for it, but like light at the end of the tunnel. Whatever word describes that.
So disturbing in what way?
Well, disturbing for one, beyond just the COVID and the pandemic, the chaos that was going on in neighborhoods, that was quite disturbing. Just the whole George Floyd and the protests and seeing how people were being treated and how people was treating each other was very disturbing. So that was, if I think about 2020, that's the first thing that pops in my head. Then on top of that, when I say chaotic, it was one, the pandemic, two, you didn't know for certain how you could get it, how you can prevent it. At one point, my mom was just like, it's airborne. We have to stay in the house. You know, it was quite uneasy of how you can even survive on your day-to-day life with the pandemic. And then I say light at the end of the tunnel because I am an optimistic person. And I know at some point we will resolve and get past all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Nishat, what are your thoughts on that? When you think back to 2020, what would your 3 words be?
Infuriating, eye-opening, and good Lord, just straight up depressing.
Depressive?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, it's a combination of all 3 of these things because, well, in regards to police brutality, we've seen upwards of 1,000 cases this year alone. We see how the people who are supposed to be our public servants, like the folks in Congress and the House of Representatives, not doing what they're supposed to do as elected officials in government, which is to take care of us. They have not done that in terms of the COVID response and just helping the common man out financially. And on top of all that, seeing how a disturbingly large portion of the country responded to our cries for help as a generation, you know, speaking like as a race, that sort of thing.
That's really interesting. When you say a cry for help as a generation, what are you referring to? Do you feel that your generation particularly has been left out or not been heard?
Largely, because generally speaking, young people, you know, our word is passed off, like we don't really matter. And that's been the case for not only Gen Z, but also millennials, with how we've been infantilized to the point of, say, our wages being stolen, right? Like for, I think the last 20, 25 years, wages have stagnated, but the cost of living has gone up. There have been countless protests to raise the federal minimum wage to $15, which is in most areas of the country, or at least half, if not most, that's counted as a living wage. But, you know, we're essentially forced into these low wage jobs and we have to live with what we're given. And when we fight for that, it's just passed off as being selfish, saying, oh, do you want $15 to flip burgers? As if, you know, fast food jobs are the only low wage jobs that are in this country. When we are largely in a service economy.
Yeah, so I think there are definitely things that happen, kind of like the type of jobs have changed. That's certainly the case. So when I'm listening to all 3 of you, it sounds like all 3 of you, is overwhelmed the right word to describe it?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, at least for me.
With the cherry on top.
It is?
I would say it's definitely a word that applies to it, but it's hard to generalize, in my mind, an entire movement of people under one single label like that. In a way, I sort of feel it's almost restrictive because it's many separate voices. As the same way I've...
Yeah, but I was referring to the 3 of you, what you just said.
Oh, well, I suppose I could definitely describe myself as a bit overwhelmed.
Yeah. So let's talk about, if you look, let's go back, let's say before COVID. So even let's go 2 years back. Has your outlook changed from 2 years back? What were you expecting your future would look like going forward at that point? And I know there's always, we all grow up, we all change in how we look at things and things like that. But overall, has your overall outlook or your feeling of where you see your life go changed within the last year or 2 years? Or is it even going back more than that?
Well, much like Star, I like to consider myself an optimist. So I believe that it is still technically possible to get to where I want to be, but I've seen significantly more roadblocks come into that. And I'm a fairly privileged person, and it's really quite jarring. Growing up, your parents tell you sort of how to do things. Like, they tell you to expect upward momentum in your job. They tell you to expect the ability to feasibly get a raise, when in reality, the closest I've had to that is someone coming in and being like, congratulations, you're making $7.28 an hour instead of $7.25 now. And it's not feasible. They had the ability to build wealth and equity, whether it be through possessions, property, or their job, and you don't really see that. Most of the jobs I see are moving towards a gig-style economy, which is temporary work. And as you've just seen in California, with the passing of Proposition 22, I believe it was, Uber drivers aren't even considered employees. They're private contractors. Yeah. And the rise of contracting work is not pro-worker. Yes, it can provide a lot of jobs, but realistically, are the people that work those jobs even prospering from them or getting what they should? That's really what's changed my mind or opened my eyes to that issue, I would say.
Star, you look like you have something to add on this one.
Oh, I was just agreeing. Well put. Absolutely. If you think about, and I am indeed a millennial, but when I think about where my parents were when they were my age, they were set in their careers. They, by this point they were at a managerial position or so forth. And not saying millennials aren't at this day and age, but not as much or as often as you would see in our previous years. And that's heartbreaking. But again, me being optimistic, one thing I would say that I've noticed with millennials is more African American women have graduated from college or universities now than we have in the past. Unfortunately, we still make one of the least amounts in the workforce, but there is still some upward momentum when you say as far as education wise. So that is not something that my mom may have experienced and say, oh, I can say the same, because it wasn't. So there's also that there. It's like, okay, well, we know that we're educated, but yet we're still not making the money. So, it's that double-edged sword almost.
Mm-hmm. So with what you felt strongly about previously, with all the developments in the last year, would you say what we've seen with George Floyd, with even with election, with how the media went, all the different things all over the space, that was really different this year than in any other year. I mean, the world being shut down, the stores closed, etc. Would you say this was kind of a wake-up call, particularly for your generation, to kind of look at it and say, oh, wait a minute, all these things that we've been taught aren't really like that? And maybe we need to, these are things that we need to fix, or we even can fix?
Well, I'm gonna speak on a certain demographic here because one, I'm from the inner city. So for me, 2020, I would say where I am from, it was screaming out. It wasn't, something that we didn't think was true, found out to be, or what we thought was true wasn't true. It was what we feel is now being voiced. And now we're screaming it out instead of then asking for help. That's something I can say for where I grew up. When I think about the what I envisioned or what I believed to be true, it was just one of those told you so moment for me, honestly. If you want to think about the protests and the riots and things, it was one of those things for me of I wasn't shocked. Honestly, I wasn't.
Nishat, how do you feel about this? Would you say, you said before that this is kind of no one heard you scream. Would you declare 2020 the year that actually was a wake-up call, and because everything is now screaming out, are we at that turning point?
Honestly, I sure do hope so, because it's been a massive snowball. Everything that's going on right now, I'd say, has been a long time coming in terms of protests. All sorts of things are going on right now. If it's not police brutality, it's worker solidarity. Like, we've seen that massive protest in India where they had millions of people striking so farmers could earn, the wages they deserve. And more and more people are starting to become more aware of where they are in society, unfortunately. Like, for example, seeing Republican legislators, I'm sorry, I have to call this out, Republican legislators pour money, trillions of dollars into the stock market at the beginning of this pandemic, yet they want to give us $300 for unemployment, $600 as a stimulus, and $1,200 as a one-time thing before that, saying they're champions of the working class people, all that sort of stuff, when clearly they aren't. Because right now, at least, I'd say a sixth of this country is facing eviction.
Yeah.
And this is in at least 36 states, if I'm not mistaken, 36 states. So if this isn't a wake-up call for people to realize that we need to hold a lot of people accountable, then honestly, I do not know what is.
And this is great information. I love that, actually, because that is kind of the lead-in for the next segment. We are going to take a quick break, so please bear with us. When we come back, we want to talk more about the things that the young people would like to see change. And yes, there's definitely a lot of room we need to talk about in terms of how we can create a world, or co-create a world, that everybody wants to live in and where everyone has a voice and also the right place. So stay with us.
I felt a little embarrassed to come back to school, but eventually, once I came here, I knew that it's for a bigger goal.
Very dedicated, hardworking. He connected with his teachers, he connected with other students. That was one of the key reasons why he was able to keep forging ahead.
It was amazing to see him graduate. This was one thing that meant so much to him, and of course, it meant so much to us too.
With the help of my father and having my son, that was all the motivation that I needed. That support is everything.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
Dad?
Just 1 minute, okay?
Hey, Bobo, do trees tell each other stories?
I'm sorry. I'm afraid I don't know that.
Hey, why don't we go find out? Listen.
Do clouds take naps?
I couldn't tell you.
Can birds draw pictures?
I don't have an answer for that.
Dad, do stars visit their friends?
Look!
Welcome back to Smart Sustainability. I'm Nicolette DeVidar. We have a super interesting topic tonight, one that a lot of people, particularly the younger generations, grapple with, but I think that really pertains to all of us, and it's time to listen in and hear what they have to say and how they envision their future and how we all can work together to get some of those obstacles addressed and possibly, hopefully, out of the way. So I wanted to pick up what Nisha said before, because you mentioned, you know, the grappling with all the bickering, the political bickering, in terms of talking about $300 extra, $600 extra, while all the money went into the stock market, etc. When we see this, though, and when we think about the ideal future, what would you like to see happen at this point? The mindset shift, obviously, it's a mindset shift. So what do you think what needs to happen?
I'd say, honestly, is the richest country in the world. Speaking like from an American standpoint, as the richest country in the world, we can obviously afford to establish some sort of universal basic income. And that would lift a lot of people out of poverty and would help a lot of other working class people, you know, feel less stressed about their financial situation. And it's ridiculous how essentially these people are oligarchs at this point. It's how they're being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, six figures, to, you know, tell us that we're only getting a crumb of what we put into the economy in terms of tax revenue. Because fiscal year 2019, I think $23 trillion tax revenue that the United States government had collected. So it's only fair to us that it's returned to us in some meaningful capacity. Like, I understand that the government needs money to operate, yes, but the more money you give people, the more money you can extract in terms of taking it from where it needs to be taken from. Instead of overtaxing people who are making, you know, who are barely making ends meet, tax the people who are able to make millions of dollars in a single day. Tax the people who are able to give every person, or every adult rather, in this country $3,000 and still have more money than they know what to do with. And that's one way, or a couple at least.
So you think these are the most pressing issues right now that should happen? Star, what do you think? What's the most pressing thing that you think needs to happen now or should happen now?
I would say one, definitely we need more job opportunities. And I would say not just a job, but a job where people can survive. If minimum wage in your area, and I'm just generally speaking, let's just say minimum wage $7.25 an hour, the likelihood of someone surviving off of $7.25 an hour is very, very difficult. Where are you staying? Where are you living? Where can you get groceries? And like, how can you survive? It's not necessarily just giving or providing a place of employment, but making sure people have enough money to survive in this economy. Like he said previously, the cost of living have gone up, but salaries haven't, hourly wages haven't. So we're expecting people to survive off of low income, even though the economy and things isn't, replicating or duplicating that fact. So people are, living in poverty, even though the poverty line doesn't, quite match with what's really going on.
That's why likely the idea of universal basic income, I think, is becoming more likely. But then, of course, we also have to cap the prices so the prices don't go through the roof. That's the one thing. Callaway, you have something to add? What do you think are the most pressing things right now?
So I think there need to be a rise of three pillars that I think community should be based on. That is to say, equality, honesty, and accountability. Honesty is the first one, because there has to be an acknowledgement that this is a problem. I've seen aggressive pushback to that.
By whom?
It really varies. It comes and goes in places you never expect to see it. It could be in suburbs, or it can be in downtown DC. People for some reason, don't want to acknowledge that this is an issue. They want to categorize it as people just being angry. But there is a problem, and once it's acknowledged, you can start to move forward with accountability. That is holding your public figures accountable, holding the offices that you elect accountable, holding the people you put into office accountable, because they are supposed to be pushing for the common good for you. And equality is the end result of that. Equality for race, gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and equality among classes as well. The classism in this country has just grown and grown and grown. And it's become more and more apparent, especially with COVID, with a lot of jobs just being removed. At the university I work at, the first people to be cut were facilities. Those are the people that service the buildings. That's the largest group of people. They're paid the least, but they were the first to go for some reason, which doesn't make sense if you're trying to save money at all. It also impacted people of color way more than any other demographic. And frankly, those three just build community off of that. And that's the steps that I want to see moving forward towards.
So you think there is a denial, so to speak?
Absolutely.
Well, the question is, do you feel like this at home too? Do we have a transparency issue? If you feel like that, please let us know. You can always go to our Facebook page, facebook.com Smart Sustainability Television, because TV, we would be interested in hearing what you think if there is a transparency issue. I think most people actually would agree that there is a transparency issue. We need more accountability. And I think particularly the younger generation, your generation, all three of you really, I think you would expect this, right? Because see, my generation, I'm a Gen X. We grew up, you knew the rules, right? There were milestones, there was like a clear-cut career path, there were your milestones, there were like, you had planning guidelines, so to speak, milestones. We knew we had to wait your turn because the promotion would go like in a certain way, etc. That's all out the window. And with digitization, you no longer have to do this because now you have people who actually have technology skills who sometimes are younger than older demographics who have different kind of jobs. So the promotion models need to change. So that's one of them. But I think generally we were not so much expecting it, but what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, and I think you may witness that at home as well, is that what I'm hearing from all three of you is that there should be an expectation of accountability and of transparency and of honesty. Yes. But let me ask you, do you think we could all handle the truth?
I think it's become very apparent with what we've seen that the longer we hide it, the greater the issue is going to be that we have to tackle. That's my opinion. You can only deny a problem for so long before it's just growing and growing. You're just tossing more wood onto a fire. Eventually, that's just going to start burning other things down, for lack of a better metaphor, I guess.
You agree, Nishat? I see you nodding back there.
Yeah, very much so. And if it's not something like accountability, it's also things like racial relations or police brutality. And the more you cover these things up, or the more you try to hide it, the bigger of an issue it gets. Like if you don't educate people on what's actually supposed to be going on, they have no sort of compass or barometer or thermometer, or whatever, metaphor, euphemism you want to use for what's supposed to happen.
Do you think this is also because we have, by and large, like people in office sometimes that are in there for decades on a stretch, and there's a disconnect?
Oh, without a doubt.
So that would need to be changed too. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. Like there are people who have been serving in Congress since Nixon, and it's like what we say. What's I'm trying to collect my thoughts here.
Can you mind if I hop onto this for a second, actually?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think, and this is something I've noticed too, there's a certain mindset by people that have been in this system for a very long time that is, well, I've worked this hard for this, you have not. And we need to look past, people need to understand, you need to look past aspects like that, like people saying you can't just remove student debt because what about the people that have already paid into it? It's a matter of progress, and there's this harsh ideal that I've never really quite understood, which is, well, I've got mine, whereas to say I've gone through this and I came out successful, so you do it.
Yeah, it's like this paying your dues thinking, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
As an American citizen, why do you have to pay your dues like that? I believe the American people are entitled to much more than they are getting. And I think they just need to be aware of that and understand that the people that are out there that are saying this, there's not two sides. It's you just need to understand their point of view and be a part of that. Like, I don't want to ramble too much on this, but that's my point there.
Star, you feel the same?
I agree, and I will add another piece to this, or another component. When I was growing up, I was always told, you work hard work pays off. My dad would say that, embed that in our head. Every time we had a test, anything we had to do, hard work pays off. And it wasn't until I became an adult that I saw that that was not the truth. It's like hard work doesn't always pay off. You could work your tail off and still receive nothing. So that idea of paying dues is not that people aren't willing to pay dues. It's when are the dues paid? When is my dues cap done so I can start living and flourishing? Because that no longer exists. You know, like you said, Nicolette, when you joined the workforce, it was, you knew when the promotions were coming. You knew when, you were going to get a promotion or when you're going to move up into an organization, what have you. Yeah. That no longer exists. So you have people, quote unquote, paying dues that's not growing. It's not improving or progressing in their field, and they're just staying stagnant. And then we wonder, and then it's like the pay rate stays here, but yet the economy goes up and cost of living go up, and you're just sitting here like, wait a minute, this is not how this is supposed to go. And you wonder why people are frustrated.
Yeah, in essence,
it doesn't add up. It's not rocket science. I feel like if you have, or you're passionate about anything in life and you willing to work minimum wage just to do that one thing you love, you're paying dues.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
That's dues.
Yeah.
Now, how long do you have to do that? To start paying off.
Yeah, so I guess essentially what we have is like there's this paying dues attitude for that's based on a thinking in terms of a linear career path, when that linear career path isn't
no
there, but the paying dues is still there. That attitude.
That linear career path especially is something that's really gone astray.
Yeah.
I mean, growing up, my first job was at a grocery store, and I was there for longer than I'd like to admit, but you see people just hopping between. It's like, for going from like grocery store to pizza place to like pet store, department store, retail, all of that. Whereas when you're growing up, your parents are like, yep, I was with this job for decades, and I finally got my just desserts. And I'm like, that's fantastic. I've been moved to 3 separate departments. I do 3 times the work, and I still make the same amount of money.
So I was actually going to ask all 3 of you, do you talk to your parents about these things? Because I'm sure you must hear from your parents probably too, like, as you just said, I've done it this and this and this. And then you come with a completely different reality. What's their reaction?
I think there's a bit of confusion, as there would be with anybody, because the world, you grow up in a world, you live in that, and to a certain degree they still are, because they have had their success. And it's really hard to acknowledge at any point in time that someone may have it harder than you did doing the exact same thing that you did growing up. That's just intrinsically difficult to acknowledge. But it's important. Admitting that you may be wrong about something is one of the most important skills that anybody can have, regardless of the situation, regardless of what you do, because that is what allows for change. That is what betters you as a person. And while I talk to them, and there's agreements and there's disagreements, which is natural. It's a conversation, it's a dialogue. I know there are certain parts they can't ignore. So it feels like they're seeing it, but there's almost a confusion of how did we get here.
Okay, so I need to help here, all the parents actually that are in that too, because I think maybe, and I'm just saying this, maybe it's also that parents still would like to parent. So you got to think about us in this case too.
Of course.
So if we're kind of facing a world that most parents are lost to right now because they can't give you the guidance. How can we give guidance about the world that's essentially not our world anymore, right? So yes, we have life experience. Yes, we can give you our outlook and things like that, but we cannot really help you navigate through a world that the parents haven't navigated through yet, right? So I'm just saying, so give parents a little slack on this one, because we all need to come to grips with this new world.
Of course.
And learn that, and maybe also learn how to work together differently. So we can say, look, you guys are going in a new world and we don't really know, I may not be able to give you the best advice on this one, you know?
That's fair. And I don't want to ostracize parents, obviously.
No, I get that. I'm just saying, you know.
That's a very good point, actually. There is, from a parental standpoint, it has to be scary to not know what to tell your kids, because there's no manual for that, and that's just wanting to be a good parent is the number one thing people want. They want to do right by their kids by what they did right by growing up.
Yeah.
And I would say my advice to that is, if you ever feel like you can't speak to a situation, speak to your values. Speak to the core beliefs that you found that made you a good person. Because all we want is for one, to be understood, and two, to look to you and to say, we know you have experience. We know things may be different now. We would like to talk to you. A dialogue is the most important thing you can have with your children. It leads to a feeling of equality. The child is more likely to listen to you, and it will really open up a lot of doors.
So let me ask you, have you had a dialogue lately with your children or with your kids or with your college students? So you just heard it, so perhaps this is also an invitation for all of us to take that step and do that if we haven't done so. And I think it's also a fair point, what you just said, to say that we're equally scared because we equally don't know where it's going to go. So at the end of the day, we're all sitting in the same boat, just at different, at different seats, so to speak. I want to talk a little bit in this next part about the things you feel most strongly about. So apparently we talked about economics, the wages, which all goes into the accumulation of wealth. Are there any other things you want to mention in that regard? So when you think about your life accumulating wealth, is this important? Nishat, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Without a doubt, yes. Given that's just how society has steered us at this point, the accumulation of wealth is one of the most important things. And it's harder for a lot of people in this country. Demographically, millennials and Gen Z, like I stated earlier, racially, it has been so difficult for non-white groups of people, I would say especially Black people, to gain equity due to legislation and all sorts of insidious things that have been written into law in this country. Going off on a tangent real quick, but back in the 30s to the 60s, there was, you've heard of the Levitt towns, white flight from inner cities. It allowed for an unprecedented amount of economic growth for white people in this country because they were given what are essentially free homes through ultra low interest loans from the government, and paid essentially pennies that they had to pay back. And it's obvious that permanent housing, is one of the largest factors of equity in the entire world. If you have access to things like, if you have access to utilities, just groceries, that sort of thing. It's a lot better for your wallet, a lot better for your mental health. And a lot of people in this country have not and do not have, you know,
So when you talk about
that sort of privilege.
when you speak about accumulation of wealth, making this more equitable, are you talking about collective wealth, or are you talking about individual wealth? Because there's a difference. So some people could argue accumulation of wealth means that can I go out and get, from my talent, go and set my path to whatever, the money I'm raking in, or are you saying I'm really more in terms of equitable, make sure that everyone has a roof over their head, make sure that people have the food they need, even talk about, do we need a different concept for public utilities? Because I don't think that's off the table.
I would say I'm speaking to both of those things, because when it comes to collective wealth, as we've seen, the United States is considered one of the, if not the richest country on the planet. Yet over half of the people who live here are a paycheck or two away from being homeless. So that's more so speaking to individual wealth, because when one person is able to afford the things that they need, it adds into that, it's actual collective wealth. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm trying to say?
Yep, I understand. Star, you have something to add in there?
One thing I would add is throughout history, and he mentioned some valid points here, but throughout history, America has functioned off of oppression, period. So we've been surviving off a bad habit, and it just so happened that now these bad habits are coming at our front door, and people are noticing more, and now we can't ignore it anymore. That whole classism, racism, all these things aren't just something that we woke up doing. This is something that we was taught. This is something that was developed throughout the years. And America has survived doing this throughout the years. And now here it is. Here we are in 2020, and we're moving forward. Things that we thought was going to work, it's no longer working.
Absolutely.
And I will add that into that from what he was talking about from the past.
I want to talk about something else that I actually found really startling, and that's the suicide rate among young people particularly, which I find really unbelievably shocking and alarming. So I got some stats on this. So between 2007 and 2018, now that's 2 years before COVID, if you think about this, it increased 60% between 10 to 24-year-olds in the United States. So all the young people, and out of 75% of young adults that are mentally struggling with COVID, 1 in 4 is suicidal. Those are data according to the CDC. Why do you think, or all these things we talked about, is this why your generation is so deeply affected by this, or is there something we have not talked about yet in that respect?
I'd like to say something on this, if I may.
Okay, we'll let Cal go first and then start. Okay, let's go.
First off, I'd like to apologize. I don't want to cut you off.
No worries, go ahead.
No, you're fine. Thank you.
As someone whose partner has very, very severe clinical depression, and who I have been with through hospitalization, one of the most common questions you're asked growing up at any point in time is, you sit down and people are like, so what's your plan? The 5-year plan you have. And I'm just, I'm sorry, we're still figuring this out. It's like I'm, again, in a privileged place to be able to even be looking for the possibility of owning a home right now. Now, let's say if you get through college and you can afford that and you can survive the student loans, which, good luck. My mother was able to pay them off at 45, and I've seen some of the numbers of my friends, and that just doesn't happen anymore, unless you're falling back on your parents. And let's say you can get a home. Let's say you want to get something in the $350,000 range, and you're looking at condos, which tend to be more affordable, or traditional housing. Well, let's say, and this is again, best case situations. You have a down payment of 20%, 60,000. You go in, you try to buy a home. Let's say you go to a condo about 300,000. Put your down payments. There's also things such as there's electric, there's condo fees, which condo fees are the most ridiculous thing ever. I don't think you should be able to say it's more affordable housing if you have to pay an additional $475 a month for the privilege of owning a condo. That makes no sense. HOA fees, healthcare, the fact that the auto industry has more or less removed public transit as an availability.
I think the lobbyists for the auto industries have made sure that public transit got removed. There's a difference.
Fascinating. There is a mass removal of trains, buses, bike lanes. Think about it. Like, I had to work in DC for a while. I had to pay $27 a day to park at my job.
Yep.
And if I wanted to get to the metro, I was paying more or less the same amount for a chance to have a parking space at an already overcrowded station.
Yeah, but that's no longer an issue because now we have remote work.
For now. Because there's a matter of how long companies are going to let this happen. Because companies love to have people in seats. And while I hope, and I know this is going to make headway, it's just a matter of how the workplace can evolve around that. That's sort of what we're saying.
Yeah, but let's get back to the suicidal point. So you were talking about the suicidal point. Why is this happening? And you gave us kind of like the 5-year plan.
There's so much that you're expected to have from the get-go.
That's just not doable. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes, that any minor slip-up, that any time something else goes into the road, or you just simply don't know what to do, which is something you should never be scared of, because not knowing what to do it's natural. It's okay.
Yep. You wanted to say something to that too?
Yes. And I live with my oldest brother suffers from depression, and he's the oldest, so he's always the one that we look to. So one thing I would say, and he's not a millennial, but one thing I can say with watching him deal with it to now hearing people my age or younger deal with it is, and I always praise this, the power of social media, but another component, which is the bad side of social media, is you can live whatever life you want to live on it, and it doesn't have to be the truth. And out looking in, people believe it, and that's added pressure. So outside of that 5-year plan that he was speaking of, then you have to look at your peers, the people that you grew up with doing things that they were supposed to do. And if you're not meeting to those standards, then you then also feel like you're a failure, or you have that anxiety of I'm not equipped. And then to add insult to injury, it doesn't help that society add on this extra, like if you're at this age and you're living at your mom's house, you're a failure. If you're at this age and you don't own a car, then you're a failure. And it's enough to make a person just overwhelmed, and just enough is enough. And I hate to say this, but I would say millennials and going down to Generation Z and so on, a lot of us haven't found our place in life, right? Like my grandmother says, it's like the circle of life, like the Lion King, but we haven't quite found our place yet. And if you haven't found your place yet, and it seems like people around you know exactly where they need to be and have everything figured out, that adds on to it. The younger generations are loners. They are. They can sit and play video games for hours, come down, eat, don't speak to no one or human contact for hours and days, and it doesn't faze them. They are loners by instinct. So if you have that on top of everything else that life throws at you, how can you deal with something like COVID or just day-to-day life? And I think that adds to the suicide rate. And if I had to boil it down to one entity right now, and even though I believe in it and its power, I also know it has a downside, which is social media.
Yeah, Star is not wrong. Going back to what she said about, I assume she's talking about Gen Z.
Yeah.
She's not wrong at all. For a very long time, personally speaking, and what I've noticed with some of my friends and loved ones, we don't like to talk.
Yeah, we've noticed that. I mean, my generation particularly have definitely noticed that there is like that the communication is an issue between the generations. I'm sure you would agree probably at home.
And not only that, but what am I trying to say? It's either a combination of downplaying, dismissal, or misunderstanding of the issues that we face that contribute to that. For example, let's see here. I'm gonna take a page out of my own book. Just things. Sometimes people are just the way they are, and I'm just gonna straight out say I do have suicidal thoughts. Being able, and normally under any other circumstances, I would not be able to tell a soul that. But because of the support system that I have with my friends, people I love dearly, that's possible. And too many people don't know that they can have these support systems.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, are you working obviously with people and you're seeking help? So if you would share that with our viewers, where would you send them to build a support system to get some help?
Well, first, community, just if you're a part of a community, that's look into your safe spaces. That's the first place you should start. I am not a psychotherapist, so please do not follow me on this by the letter. But look into your safe spaces, establish a group of people who you trust and can confide in, and generally, make sure that there's 2, 3, 4 people that you can do that with. And I guess reflect on what's been bothering you. And you should definitely get also factor in professional help if you're fortunate enough or are able to, have that. And it helps like mountains.
So in these last 4, go ahead.
One thing I would say, and again, I said I grew up with an older brother that dealt with this, is a lot of times when people have suicide thoughts, and I don't know if this is true for you, but a lot of times people feel that they are alone and no one understands exactly what they're going through. And if you are experiencing anything remotely close to this, there are a lot of free therapy out there for you. You just have to find out what's closest to you. They even have it virtual. They have meetings that you can Zoom. I know, and I'm not ashamed to say, before I even moved to DC, I used to work out twice a day, and I had my therapist. That was my outlet. And not that I had those extreme, or felt like suicidal thoughts or anything. I just felt like, how can I move forward? I was going through that depression phase of, I went to school, now where can I find a job? That was my, I was having this pressure of getting it together, and it was overwhelming for me. But I would say I did not pay for it. It was free therapy. So there are free therapists out there. If you feel like you're having a meltdown, there's a bunch of hotlines. Please take advantage of it. If you feel like you can't go to, like you said, friends or family or anything like that, the resources are out there. A bunch of young people are on social media and Googling and things like that. Google free therapy, and I'm sure you'll come up with a bunch of stuff, and by all means, take advantage.
Yes, and if you do actually find some, if you do come across, you can also check out our Facebook page, but also if you have some, please feel free to contact us. You can actually let us know as well, and we'll post some where you can go and find some help. I do want to spend those last 2 minutes, now we talked about all the challenges and the issues. If we started with a blank slate, I want to talk those last 2 minutes about the ideal future. what we can make of it, and let's start with that. How would you envision that? If we start with a blank slate, I know you talked already about 3 pillars. Star, since I got you on the screen, how would the ideal future look like for you going forward? Let's say we talk from now till the next, and I hate to use the time frames because we live in a world that's so volatile. But in an ideal world, what will be key pillars that are in there for you?
Equity over equality. And just laws.
Just laws?
Yes. No,
but you
more
always have
unjust
people
laws.
who, okay.
No more unjust laws. Someone can commit a crime and serve 5 years. Another person can commit another crime, similar crime and face 15 years. Just laws, equity over equality. And I think that will help a lot.
But circumstances may differ for each of those cases.
Yes, circumstances can vary, but if you have cases where there are similar cases, race always plays a part in that, right? There's more African American men in prison than any other group, more Black and Latino men. That's the truth. So if you have it where as though more Black men are going to jail for a longer period of time for a certain crime versus their white counterparts, whatever the case may be, that's not justice.
That's good. We're almost out of time. I'm going to get Nishat on one last word, Nishat, in terms of how you would like to see the future. One word. I guess he is.
I'm just going to straight up say it.
Yeah.
Socialism.
Socialism. We covered a lot of ground this evening, so thank you very much for watching and for being with us. It's a super interesting topic. We hope you engage with us on this one, and you also listen to your kids to really learn more about where they're coming from so we can all work through and tune into our human side, which really is at the heart of the matter. I hope you have a wonderful holiday, and we'll see you next week. Good night.